So today I'm going to build out the same workflow on both n8n, which I've been using for about 24 hours, and then Power Automate Cloud Flows, which, if you know me, I've been using for about 4 or 5 years. And then I would like to have a look at the equivalent of a retrieval agent, which is an agent that can go away based on a knowledge source and answer questions. I'll build that or demonstrate that at least in n8n, and then jump across onto the equivalent Microsoft product, which is Copilot Studio, and show you how we can build out a basic retrieval agent based on that knowledge source of Wikipedia. But before I get started, if you've not met me before, I'm an ex-MVP, I'm a current Microsoft Cloud Solution Architect, and I'm just out of winning the Scottish Summit UK Community Awards in Aberdeen at the weekend. So if you haven't subscribed already, make sure you do, and let's jump into the demonstration. So here I am already over on n8n. I can go and add a brand new workflow, and today's workflow that I'm going to build is based on quite a common scenario: someone filling out a form and providing feedback, capturing that data into an Excel sheet, and then sending a follow-up email to let me know that someone has completed that form. So just like Power Automate, we have a trigger. At the moment this is a manual trigger based on when the button is clicked, but instead I'm going to delete that trigger and replace it with the form trigger. And the first thing you might notice is, very much like we have in Power Automate, we have the concept of triggers. We have an inbuilt n8n form trigger. We also have access to lots of other form platforms as well. I'm going to go with the n8n form and build out a basic form using the native tools. So the first thing that I can do is I can change the authentication. I'm going to leave it public. I can change the form path, and I'm going to call this the DemoBar365 feedback form. And I'll make both of these URLs available for you to complete if you want to provide me any feedback or any ideas for future videos. In terms of the form title, we'll call it the DemoBar365 feedback form. The form description will be provide Demo with some feedback on his YouTube or future ideas. And then I need to capture some data. So we have these form fields, field labels. In this case, I would love to know what your name is, and we'll capture that as text, and we'll say that that is a required field. We're going to add in a field for their email address. And the good thing about this is we've actually got different validated strings. So here we can have an email type, and that will get validated if you mistype your email address, but I'll not make it required. If you don't want to give me your email, that's not a problem. And then finally, I would love to know what your feedback is. So we'll add in feedback, and rather than it being text, I'll make it text area, which is equivalent of multi-line text over on the Power Platform. Again, I'll make that a required field because I'd love to get your feedback. So with that in place, I can actually test that step, and we've got a sample form popped up over on the right hand side. I can type in my name and I can provide feedback. What a lovely demo. And if I submit that form and then close this form down, you'll see that I have over on the right hand side the sample output. I have my name that's been captured, an empty email because it was an optional field, and the feedback, what a lovely demo. So with that in place, I can jump back across onto the canvas. I can actually drag this trigger to one side and make use of this full workspace I've got here. And the next thing I want to do is I want to add a row into a table in Excel. So if I search for Excel here, I can see the Excel connector, and then I can append a row to a table. So this brings up, again, the same interface as I saw before. If I jump across onto an Excel spreadsheet that I created earlier, you'll see that I have a table. It's called the n8n demo Excel sheet. I have a name column, an email column, and an inquiry column, and I'm going to populate these based on the data that's captured via the form on n8n, but also on a Microsoft form too, using Power Automate. So back over onto my n8n workflow, we can see that the resource is based on a table. We're appending. We've got loads of different other operations that we can do, but we'll stick with append. I want to select the workbook, and it's searching through my OneDrive right now and has found my n8n demo file. I want to connect to the sheet. There's only a sheet 1, and then connect to my table. I have a table 2 in there because I was experimenting earlier. And then the data mode allows me to either map the columns based on my own settings, or I can auto map. I'm going to stick with the map based on the values to send below, and I can add in a field. I can choose the column, in this case the name. I can add in another field, again choose the email and add in the third field, which of course is the inquiry, and then I can drag and drop from the left hand side over into these areas. But the thing we've got here is we've got a fixed value or we've got an expression. And I don't want these values to be fixed, I want them to be based on an expression, I want them to be dynamic. I can either type in an expression or I can hold on to the value on the left hand side, drag and drop, and you'll see the expression notation being written down there. The same if I jump into email, again I can drag and I can drop, but because I've left it as fixed, you'll see that I've got the fixed string of email. I don't want the fixed string of email, I want an expression, so it's dynamic. So again, I'll go back, I'll drag that across, and it's brought across that expression, of which the current result is empty. Finally, if we jump down into the column for inquiry, very much like writing expressions in Power Automate, if you're not a fan of doing this, then you don't need to, you can do the drag and drop, but if you want to, I can type in the value for feedback. Is it going to be case sensitive? Yes it is, Damien. So we'll put in a capital F and we can see the result has now come through dynamically. What a lovely demo. So we've now built out this action. It's going to populate a row in a table based on those dynamic values that I've captured in my form. And if I test that step, over on the right hand side we can see we've got a green tick, everything has worked fine. If I jump across into my Excel file, we can see that data has been added into my Excel file. So jumping back to the canvas, the last thing I'd like to do is I'd like to send myself a notification. So we'll search for send email. There is a standard send email action, but actually I'd like to do it with Outlook, and we do have Outlook integration. If I search for send, we can see we've got send a message or send a draft, which is actually quite useful. You can do that via the Graph API, and I've got a video on that, but to have it natively available as part of n8n is actually quite impressive. So we'll go with send a message because I just want an email confirmation. I'm going to send it to myself, which is my dev account.onmicrosoft.com. The subject will be new submission, and we can include some of the dynamic values. I think if I drag and drop this across, we're actually getting some of that dynamic content through there. So I'll say that we have a new submission from, and then we've got their name, their email is, and I can drag and drop that in, email, and their feedback is, and we'll drop in the inquiry. But if I hit the test step, we can see it's resulted in true, and if I jump across onto my email, we have a new submission from Damien. There, albeit I've used the wrong there, email is, and their feedback is, what a lovely demo. Our automation is now up and running and working. If I go back to the canvas, we now have our working automation. If I go into our trigger at the start here and grab the production URL, if I paste that into a new tab, we can see that the form is currently not activated, and clearly I've not used n8n before. But if I go back to the canvas, there is a little toggle here to make that form active. Jump back across onto the other tab and refresh. We now have our working form, and I can have my name Damien. I can put in test@damobird365.com. Feedback, this is my first live test. And if I submit that form, jump across over onto Excel, there is my test data, and I heard a ping, I have a new submission from Damien, their email is, and their feedback is, this is my first live test. So we've built our workflow in n8n. What does the equivalent look like in Power Automate? So if we jump across onto Microsoft Forms, we need to build out a form before we can start building out our automation in Power Automate. This Microsoft form is going to capture feedback with the name, the email address, and the feedback or ideas, just like I did in n8n. And you'll see that the email doesn't have an asterisk next to it because it's not a required field. I do need to make it available publicly, so at the moment only people on my tenant within Microsoft 365 can respond, but if I change it to anyone can respond, then I can save and share that link with people later on in the description, and you can choose if you want to use the n8n form or the Microsoft form. With that form in place, if I jump across onto Power Automate, Here I can go in to create a new flow. I'm going to go with an automated flow because it's going to be based on when a new response is submitted. So very much like we had in n8n, you need to choose a trigger first, and this is going to be based on when a new response is submitted. Now when that response is submitted, we need to attach it to a particular form, and that form is called feedback to demo. So there we go, the feedback to demo form, and we need to add in an extra action because we need to get the response details. And there is the action for the response details. So similar ideas, we need to add in a few different actions. I need to choose that form again, which is my feedback to demo, and then we need to choose dynamic values, which we do via this lightning bolt. And the lightning bolt allows me to pick that response ID. So just like we saw in n8n, where you're dragging and dropping across the pills, either the fixed values or the expressions, this is adding in an expression to get the value from the action or the trigger above. So with this in place, we have the response details. I want to add a row into a table. And if I search for Excel, like I did previously, I've got the Excel Align business connector. I can see more, and one of these will be to add a row into a table. So there we go, add a row into a table. And now all I need to do is fill in the details. So the location was based on my OneDrive. The document library is also based on my OneDrive. So the next interesting challenge I've got here is I need to go and find that file, and because I have so many files in my OneDrive, the user interface does not allow me to go beyond my book 1.4. I happen to know the name of the file, so I'm going to manually type it in. It is n8n, and then I've called it demo.xlsx. The table hopefully will dynamically load based on that path, which it has, table 2. And then if I go into show all, I should see those equivalent name, email, and inquiry columns within that Excel table. And again, I can go into the lightning bolt and I can dynamically populate these based on the responses. So the name being the name, the email being the email, and the inquiry being the feedback or the ideas. And then just to make things exactly the same, I'm going to send an email with a confirmation. We'll click on that send an email action. I'll fill it in again with my dev account, new submission from MS Forms, and you have a new submission from, we'll put in their name, their email is, and I've spelt there correctly this time, and their feedback is, onto that lightning bolt and choose their inquiry. And you can see now we built out the equivalent flow. I'll give that flow a quick name, new form submission feedback, and we can save it, and then I can publish it and we can test it. So with the flow in test mode, if I jump across onto that Microsoft form, I can click on preview, and here I can provide some details. So Damien, my test email, and this is my feedback. And if I hit submit, jumping back over onto Power Automate, we can see that the flow has run successfully. If I jump across onto my Excel file, we can see that row that's been added in. And if I jump across onto my email, I have that new submission from Damien. Their email is my test email, and their feedback is, this is my feedback. So we built the equivalent flow on both n8n and Power Automate. So if I bring these two products up side by side, you can see how quickly we built those two workflows. Same idea, we fill out a form and we save the data to Excel and send a confirmation email. Some similarities between the two products. We need to think about triggers. We can then add in our actions. I do love the fact that within n8n I can drag those nodes about and create some form of structure around them based on my own design. I can also add in post-it notes and overlay them too. So if I bring across a flow that I built earlier when I was testing, this is the layout I'd achieve by adding in these post-it notes, which can just be dragged around the screen, but they can be strategically placed over one action or many actions to describe the purpose. Over on n8n, if I wanted to add in a note, I can simply search for a sticky note and I can move that about and place that overlaying the action that I'm looking to highlight. And like you saw in my little example, you can change the color as well. So I could change it to green and change the content based on Markdown. On the right hand side with Power Automate, we've got ability to add in what are called scopes. So scope would allow you to organize your flow into little sections, and I can move some of these actions into a scope to group them together. I can also click on an individual action and I can add in a note. So if I wanted to say this is retrieving details of the form submission, that's now saved as a note, and we can see if I hover over, we've got that note on that action. So it's quite interesting. Look at the two products side by side, the pros and cons, the design, the layout, etc. and the fact that ultimately we're dealing with triggers and actions. So what does it look like if we want to create an agent? So this is where things got interesting for me, because n8n does agents too. So you can do chatbots by building out another workflow. And so rather than the trigger being based on when a form is submitted or when an email arrives, you've got when a chat message is received. And by adding in that trigger, you then have the ability to chat to your workflow. And so I can ask a question here, what is a cat? And it will trigger that workflow and work its way through to the end. So at the moment, this particular chatbot or workflow is attached to Wikipedia, and it's retrieved an answer. You can see here on the left hand side. Over on the right, we've got our log and everything that's happened. And if I go and close this and explain what's happening, we can have a look at the history. This is the trigger when a chat message is received. It jumps into a node called their AI agent. And if I jump into their AI agent, there are various settings. You can choose the style of agent you're looking for. And in this case, it's set up as a tools agent. You've got a conversational agent, and you might argue that maybe I should have gone for that one, but several different options here. Ultimately, what it does is it coordinates all these other actions to create this AI agent experience. So we have a node for OpenAI, and if I click on that, I've previously added in my credentials for my OpenAI account on chatgpt.com and supplied my API key. I've chosen the model like you do normally when you're looking to connect to a language model. And then we can see all the JSON coming in as the input and also coming out in terms of what's been generated. That is being saved in a Windows memory buffer. So we have all the information of the conversation being saved here. That chat history is being kept for up to 20 iterations. So if I add another question about cats, the bot will know that I was speaking about cats because it'll have that context and continue to answer questions. Then finally we have tools, which is based on the Wikipedia reference, and that's where it's getting its data, its knowledge source. Similar concept if you're building out any agent, and in fact the same idea if you're in Copilot Studio. So if I click on the chat once more and ask another question, how hairy are they? Because it's got the memory context, it should know I'm talking about cats, hopefully, and it will retrieve an answer based on cats. Here we go, short, medium, and long-haired cats. Remember, we have that memory context of up to 20 messages. So if I jump across onto Copilot Studio and create a new Copilot, or a new agent as we're now calling them, we have a Copilot to help us build them, but if we skip to configure, we can do this manually. I'm going to call this the Wikibot, and we need to add in a knowledge source. So the knowledge source is going to be based on the Wikipedia site. I can paste in the URL, add that in, and add it to our agent. And if I hit create, we'll have a very basic agent now that will be able to answer questions based on the knowledge from the Wikipedia site. Now before I test it over on the right hand side, there is a preview setting here that will allow the bot to use general knowledge. I'm going to disable that so that it hasn't got access to that. It's only going to use Wikipedia. Now if I jump over onto the test panel and ask what is a cat, we should hopefully get an answer based on Wikipedia. And we can see there we have some details and we have a reference back to the Wikipedia site. And if I click on that, we can see the page it's referring to. You see what I did there? Referring to. So under the bonnet, what Copilot Studio is doing is it is actually using a language model to summarize this data. So you can see how easy it is to create a retrieval agent based on knowledge, very much like I just achieved in n8n. Of course, the pricing models are different, the mechanisms of deploying them is different, But in terms of where things are going, I'm very interested in agents, in particular autonomous agents, and that's something I'm going to look to explore over the next few months and year as things develop. So if you want to follow me on this journey, make sure you like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.